We're hopeful that tomorrow the House will vote to approve an additional $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program so that they can start that up again. Kansas really did well in the first round, and that's a testament to our banks, which were ready to go and worked night and day to get applications in on behalf of their customers, as well as our small business development centers and other technical assistance providers around the state who helped small businesses get get all their information in order so they could make application. Kansas ranked number 9 among the 50 states in PPP dollars per capita. So we've done extremely well, and we want to continue that level of performance. The Department of Commerce has trained, our department has trained 12 people on how to provide technical assistance to small business owners, and that can be accessed through a live chat feature that we have at kansascommerce.gov. This is a free service open from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, and anybody can hop on there and ask questions about SBA, and we've been taking questions on other matters as well. A lot of people are inquiring about unemployment and the like, so we do our best to answer everything that we can that comes in. We are encouraging businesses that did not make application for PPP in the first round, but want to make PPP applications this second round to go ahead and reach out now to their lenders so that they're ready to go as soon as Congress turns the money back on. So that's where we stand on SBA. Second item is Department of Commerce. We have created a new website that is specifically for jobs related to coronavirus. So these are Kansas businesses that are hiring now to fill urgent needs positions across the state. There are opportunities out there for folks who are looking for work. And we are encouraging both employers to post those jobs and job seekers to go to this website, kansasworks.com/coronavirus. There are, as of right now, about 2,100 positions listed on the site, and we've had a ton of activity, over 25,000 visits in the last week. So we've heard a number of stories of people that have been successful finding jobs and companies that have been thrilled to tap into the talent that is out there, particularly after, in many counties we've had 2% or below 2% unemployment. So this is the first time in a number of years that there have been any applicants for a lot of jobs. So we're trying to make sure that the people who need employment can get that, and that those businesses who desperately need workers can have access to that talent pool. So again, kansasworks.com/coronavirus. Third update is about our Community Development Block Grant Program. These are federal funds that come from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to support Kansas communities and vital needs like infrastructure. So that could be water and sewer lines, libraries, senior centers, things of that nature. So there had been some CDBG funding rounds that we did back in the 80s, which established revolving loan funds in about 37 Kansas communities. And these are Kansas communities of a population of 50,000 or less. As we were looking around for tools to respond to the COVID crisis, we found that there's about $6.3 million that exists statewide across these different programs that's available to be loaned out as working capital to small businesses. And so I've issued directives to those 37 Kansas communities to move swiftly to push these dollars out the door and to do it with a minimum of red tape while still making sure that they do thoughtful underwriting of these businesses. So we've had a great response from communities on that, and we're continuing to push. We are very pleased as well that there's $9 million that'll be coming to the state through the CARES Act, which is going to be available around May 1. And that $9 million is going to be specified for purposes of community hospitals and nonprofit healthcare providers that are purchasing personal protective equipment, PPE, and for economic development related grants and loans. So we're going to be pushing those dollars out quickly to communities so that they can get these dollars to where they need to go. A couple of items related to nonprofits. We've had a lot of questions, not just from small businesses, for-profit businesses, but also from the nonprofit sector about what help is there for them. And something that the Department of Commerce has every year is a funding round for what's called the Community Service Tax Credit Program. And what the Community Service Tax Credit Program does is provide either a 50% or a 70% tax credit to donors who give to projects that are approved by the Department of Commerce. And that funding round this year has $4.1 million available, and $1 million of that has been set aside by Governor Kelly to be used exclusively for early childhood related programs. So that could be building projects, that could be expansion of existing programs, but all devoted to early childhood. So we're excited about that. You can get the RFP at kansascommerce.gov and check out how that works. We think it's a very attractive program, and I believe the funding round is open through May 31st. The second item related to nonprofits, we put together a quick guide for nonprofits that lists the COVID-related resources that are made available through the CARES Act and otherwise through state government. And so you can go to kansascommerce.gov to check that out as well. Next, part of our response to COVID has been making sure we understand what our capabilities are as a state in responding to that. And that particularly includes getting an understanding of what our manufacturers can do to retool, to respond to this epidemic. And we've heard from boat manufacturers that have started making surgical gowns, and aviation companies that are making masks, and we've got a balloon company that's making vinyl gloves now. So there's been a lot of retooling by Kansas manufacturers to respond to both the needs that exist as a result of COVID and what are frankly business opportunities, and we think that's great. So we've been working at Commerce with BioKansas and Kansas Manufacturing Solutions to compile an inventory of companies that are either already producing personal protective equipment or other critical needs items, or companies that would like to switch over into making those new product lines. And so we're encouraging businesses to go to biokansas.org and fill out a quick form there where they can explain who they are and what they either make now or would like to make. And with that information, we are going to have a database of all these companies that we can tap into when the state has procurement needs or local communities have procurement needs. It's just a way to make sure that there is both a buyer and a seller. So we're doing everything we can to help there. So again, that's biokansas.org. And then the last item in my prepared remarks, and then we'll switch over to Q&A, is that I want everybody to know that as an agency, we have worked really hard to respond to the immediate pandemic, and we have quickly gotten people trained, and we have pivoted and really been quite nimble and flexible as a state agency, or frankly, as any type of agency. I'm really proud of the response that we've made to respond to the immediate here and now problem. But it's important to understand that we have continued on the normal path as it relates to business recruitment and business development. So we have recruiters for the state in Chicago, New York, Dallas, Los Angeles, and then we've got somebody in Springfield, Missouri, who handles kind of the South Central states. So the state of Kansas has this presence in key markets, and my directive to those team members out around the country has been run hard, run fast, keep doing what you always do every day. we want to try and make as much lemonade from lemons as we can and seize every business opportunity that we can in this very challenging economic environment that we're in. And so I'm really pleased to report that team has opened 34 new economic development projects since March 1. And so when I say project, that just means basically it's a lead. And it's a lead where we feel like it's credible, and if we do things right and things line up, that can be new jobs and new capital investment into the state of Kansas. So 34 new projects in less than 2 months in the midst of a global economic collapse is pretty darn good as far as I'm concerned. So we're both working on the here and now, and we've got eyes firmly directed toward the future and what does life look like after we get past the COVID crisis, at least as it exists now. And I imagine there's going to be questions about what that looks like and more precise things related to the governor's executive order. And so I'm happy to take those questions or other questions that you have now.
All right. David, thank you very much. I'll unmute everybody in a minute. There's a few questions I've received here. One was on the Kansas Commerce website. Is that where also Kansas Works is, or is that through labor?
So Kansas Works is part of Commerce. They have their own website, though, which is kansasworks.com. The Department of Commerce is kansascommerce.gov.
And then the other website you gave us is biokansas.org.
That's correct.
We just cannot get consistent on the extensions.
Yeah, a little bit of alphabet soup on all these different websites. But yeah, kansascommerce.gov links to kansasworks.com. And so that's a good one-stop shop to go to, kansascommerce.gov.
All right, I've got a couple more questions, then I'll unmute everybody. Somebody asked that I applied for an economic injury disaster grant program, but haven't heard, so they assume that they don't get one. Are there more of those grants in the next stimulus plan for small business?
Yes, so if you've made application for EIDL, economic injury disaster loan, there is in the Senate bill that passed yesterday in DC included an additional $60 billion to go to EIDL grants and loans. There is a $10,000 grant portion on an EIDL loan. And that means it's just a $10,000 outright gift of sorts to the business. It's not expected to be repaid. The balance of that is, though, a loan that I believe the interest rate is 3 3/4% on EIDL. In your case, if you have not heard yet, that's not unusual. They did shut the program down on Friday, I believe, of last week. No, I'm sorry, on Sunday night. On Sunday night of this week, they shut the EIDL and PPP programs down because they ran out of money. Once this bill passes the House, we hope tomorrow, and is signed by the president, we expect pretty rapidly they will turn the flow of money back on. And our understanding is that if you're already in line with a pending application, they will just keep going in sequential order on those applications. So stay tuned. Hopefully they will have enough money to be able to get to yours, and I hope that you're funded.
Okay, so if an essential business has been shut down, are there restrictions on what needs to happen before they reopen, sanitation, PPE, et cetera?
Section to businesses that specifies what type of measures they need to take in order to be able to reopen. I don't believe those final determinations have been made yet, but I was on 2 calls with the governor this morning where she referenced that they will be putting out direction to businesses about what they need to do, at least as far as the state is concerned. assuming the stay-at-home order is lifted at midnight on May 3rd, local counties can still issue their own local orders, which could be more restrictive than where the state will be at that point. And so we're kind of in a wait and see mode. Governor's very closely watching what the data looks like, and she has said that, you know, if we get down to May 3rd and the numbers do not permit us to safely reopen, then we'll have to extend that out. But it is her hope and her intent that we can lift the stay-at-home order on May 3rd, and with that, provide guidance to businesses and communities on what they need to do.
All right, here's another question. Is there a minimum number of employees required to count as a small business? She was thinking of a construction company, maybe has 1 or 2 employees only. Is there a minimum number?
I don't know. I'm going to ask my assistant, Abby, who's sitting right here, to hop on our live chat feature at kansascommerce.gov, and we're going to ask one of my people that right now. And so we'll see how quickly they respond. All right.
In the meantime, could you remind us how the loans are forgiven, or how additional auditing is going to be put into place? You've got to have good outcomes. When we pay out the money, we want to make sure we get something in return.
So I assume the question refers to the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, which is a forgivable loan under certain circumstances. Simplifying it, PPP goes up to a maximum of $10 million, and it is forgivable in the event that the business maintains the same employment level throughout the period of the loan, which is, I believe, through June 30th. So you need to be at the same level on June 30th as what you were at the beginning of the disaster, which I believe they figured on PPP to be March 1. David Soford, do I have the right date there?
Yes.
Okay, so March 1 through June 30th are the dates. And so the whole point of the forgivable portion of the loan is to incentivize businesses not to lay people off, to keep their workers and keep paying them. And if they do, then the loan under those circumstances is forgiven.
And unemployment question, I realize that is a different department, but are Kansans receiving the federal extra $600 for unemployment filers?
Not yet.
Yeah, so I've heard.
Yeah, the folks at Labor are working night and day to be able to disperse those dollars, but unfortunately not yet. And we know people are very frustrated, and we understand 100%.
Well, I'm going to unmute everybody, so have at it, but start with Senator Skubal. Do you have any questions right now?
No, Jan. I would like to thank everybody at the department for working hard. Bringing businesses to our communities are going to be very crucial as we progress on with this. So thanks to the staff and all the hard work that's being done.
And I tried to unmute everyone, but it didn't look like it wanted to unmute everybody. So if you wanted to say something, unmute yourself and ask a question. If you have one, like Mark, or
I have a question.
Go ahead.
A follow-up on the unemployment question. Will the $600 be retroactive for the employees that qualify?
Yes, the 600 will be retroactive. So once they get the money, or once they get their first check, it will include the retro, is my understanding.
Okay, Mark from the telephone, go ahead.
Looking into the possible origins of this virus having come from there. We drove to the lab inside China's Center for Disease Control, just down the street from the market. This is one of the labs within Wuhan.
Well,
It's an origin theory Chinese officials quickly dismissed.
we've got some background noise somewhere.
reported number of cases and deaths is far less than reality. Because numbers have repeatedly been revised upward.
Well, what I'm going to do.
Another 50% was added to the on death toll alone.
Okay, I turned everybody on to mute, but you can unmute yourself. So we'll try it that way because we ended up with a lot of background noise. Okay, so David Sofer, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Other
And
questions?
Representative Kessinger, on the question earlier about what's the minimum number of employees, there's not a minimum number. So you can have 1 employee, 2 employees, up to 500 employees is the answer to that earlier question.
Okay, great. I've got a question in that Georgia is opening up, which will be interesting to watch and follow. I know that from a budget standpoint, as we're taking a look at, we got the consensus revenue estimates on how much money we're going to have, and we'll be in a huge hole in the coming fiscal year. What considerations do you have? You touched on it a little earlier, but what will it take to open up the non-essential businesses? When will, I'm sure that we'd have a lot of restrictions when we do open up, but do you have any sort of a plan laid out? I know that's one of the things people ask. We know that we've got to get rid of COVID-19 contagion, but do we have some sort of a gradual rollout where you can sort of paint a picture for us what it will take?
I think maybe the best analogy to use on this is that when we turn the economy back on, it's not going to be like a light switch where you flip it on or off. It's going to be more like a dimmer switch where gradually things start to come online. So this may look statewide. It could be that some regions where there have been very few COVID cases, they may reopen first. It could be sector by sector. Some of it, not all risks are equal. So you think about, in a restaurant environment where you've got people close by at tables and booths that are adjacent to each other, there's more interaction than there would be in a grocery store, let's say. And so it really varies from sector to sector. What the governor and her team are doing right now is getting that plan together, and I expect it to be announced very soon, but they are finalizing this plan, and it's going to be, as everything we've tried to do in the Kelly administration, we're trying to strike the right balance between first protecting public health, but also making sure that our economy can function and that our economy will be able to come back quickly. One of the concerns we've had as a Department of Commerce is looking back at history and what happened after the Great Recession. The state never fully recovered from the effects of the Great Recession 10 years ago. We grew at an annual rate of about half of the national GDP growth. We grew at half or worse of the rate of our peer states. And so what I'm focused on as secretary and what the governor's focused on is making sure that once it's safe to reopen, that we can run really fast and hard and get ahead of our competitor states in seizing the new opportunities that are going to exist in this new world after COVID.
Okay, we had another question came in and wanted to know, let's go back to the business loans. If it's not available at the local bank until later, does that end of June target get pushed out too? Does it get extended?
Well, I would expect that if the House votes tomorrow and the bill goes to the president tomorrow or Friday. The banks will be at that point should be ready to go very quickly with making new applications. As far as I know, the time horizons of March 1 and June 30th stay the same. It will probably, they will probably burn through the next $310 billion on this in 48 hours, maybe 72 hours. So it's going to go extremely quickly. And so that's why I stress to folks that you need to be talking to your lender now and getting ready for this so that when they do open it back up, you can be at the front of the line.
Okay, great. I think you said you have 4, and I'll call them salespeople around the country trying to bring business to Kansas.
Yeah, we have 6 recruiters around the country.
All right. I'll assume part of what they're doing is they're taking a look and saying, okay, when Kansas business opens up again, we want to be able to hit the ground running. Can you tell us more about what's going on in that regard, and what will it take for Kansas to be ready to get back on its feet as fast as possible? We've got 49 other states who are going to be in the same situation, trying to build their economy as fast as they can.
Yeah, well, there's really 2 parts to that. So we never stopped our recruitment team doing what they do. And we've got a different model in Kansas than most other states, where our recruiters are in market. Our New York guy lives in New York. Our West Coast guy lives in Los Angeles and works there, because we think there's a lot of advantages to being able to see people face to face and to pay visits. And they obviously haven't been able to do that face to face live interaction, but they have continued on talking to companies that are particularly looking at reshoring. So reshoring is bringing back manufacturing or other functions that American companies may have shifted to China or other markets because of lower cost labor in the past. We think that there's going to be a push by a lot of these companies to bring their operations back to the United States. And that's because their supply chains have been disrupted by COVID. There are supply chains that are just in shambles across sectors as a result of the coronavirus. So a lot of our efforts right now are on identifying who are these companies that have been struggling with their supply chains, making sure that they know that Kansas has strategic advantages, particularly in logistics, particularly in animal health. We've got some strengths in bioscience and, of course, advanced manufacturing. These are all strengths that Kansas has that not all businesses know about. So we're hustling really hard and fast right now with these companies to say, hey, as you're thinking about reshoring, we want you to know that Kansas lines up perfectly with what you need because of X, Y, Z. So that's the work that's happening right now. And just as an example, there's one that we were working on this morning where the company had been talking about needing to add some redundancy to their supply chain because they were entirely dependent on China for a key component in their product. And they hadn't gotten around to it. Well, sure enough, coronavirus hits and they are completely shut down as a result of not having that supply. So we are talking to them about establishing a new manufacturing facility in Kansas. It'll be 300 new manufacturing jobs. It's not huge, but it's a nice piece of business for us. And that's something that wouldn't be happening were it not for the COVID situation, for coronavirus. So that's what I'm talking about when we reference, how do we make opportunities? How do we turn lemons to lemonade? That's really what that's about. We are also, though, working really on a daily and hourly basis with Kansas companies that are already here that may either need some help getting through this or they see an opportunity, a business opportunity, and it may take some dollars to bring that opportunity to fruition. So, like the balloon company that wants to make latex gloves, it costs money to do the retooling, to have the equipment to make those gloves instead of making balloons. And so we're looking at what resources we have so that we can support that business in chasing this new line of business for them and adding jobs and economic activity. When I reference Kansas businesses that are already here that may need some help, what I'm talking about is we've got some businesses that may have received state incentives from the Department of Commerce, and we have very strict agreements with businesses when we give state incentives. So it might say, we'll give you $250,000 in withholding tax rebates through the PEAK program, and in exchange, you agree to create 10 new jobs and invest $500,000 in new equipment. What's happening right now is that a lot of these businesses that we have these incentive agreements in place with are not going to be able to meet their terms of the agreement within the timeframes that are specified. And so we're working with those businesses to figure out how can we be flexible in still making sure that the state's interest, the taxpayer's interest is met, but perhaps taking a longer time horizon on this than what had originally been contemplated. It is not our desire to kick any company while they're down. Our desire is for companies to be successful. And so we're trying to strike the right balance between supporting and yet still making sure that the state gets what's due to it, even if it's on a longer time horizon.
The meat packing plants have been designated as cluster sites. You talk about the impact that Kansas has, and I understand that we generate 25-30% of all the meat in the world, or at least in the country. And it's a huge concern. Are those plants going to close, or what's going to be done to protect the workers and their families?
Well, we have had multiple clusters of COVID outbreaks at meatpacking plants, and you're right, the figure is 25% of the nation's meat supply is processed by processors in Kansas. So this is a huge concern for us. KDHE is actively and aggressively monitoring these clusters, which tend to be in Ford County, which is Dodge City, and in Finney County, which is Garden. And so I don't know all the specific measures that are being taken to limit the spread of this. I know they're doing things, but I don't know precisely what that is. The goal would be to not have to shut down any of these production facilities. But also we got to make sure that we're keeping people safe. So safety is the first priority, and we're trying to keep a balanced approach. But I'm afraid I don't have a lot of details on precisely what the public health response has been in those places, but I can find out and get back to you.
Okay. I know Clay Norkey's got a question. Go ahead, Clay. I think you're unmuted.
Thanks, Jan. I read this morning that the feds have about $1.2 billion that they can offer to Kansas directly for COVID-19 relief. And that would just about make up the estimated budget shortfall. But I also understand that it's tied directly to COVID-19 response efforts. So it's a two-part question. One, can that be used for economic response? And two, what is the administration doing creatively to try to get that money?
So great question, and you accurately described the situation. So thank you. The $1.25 billion includes $110 million that will go to Johnson County and $100 million that will go to Sedgwick County directly. So that leaves a little over $1 billion that will go to the state of Kansas. We are in the process now of setting the parameters of the use of those dollars. As I understand it, we're still waiting on some guidance from OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget in DC, on precisely what we can use these funds for in terms of coronavirus response. It is my hope that economic response is an allowable use of these funds, that it's not just about public health, but we are awaiting that specific guidance now. It presents significant opportunities for us as a state to at least plug some immediate needs, but you're right that we cannot use these dollars to make up for the revenue loss of $1.3 billion that the consensus revenue estimating group came up with a couple of days ago. So we'll know more probably by the end of the week once we get that final guidance from OMB.
Any other questions for the Secretary? Well, I'm not seeing any others, so Secretary Toland, we'll let you get back. And I know that, see, Lisa told me you have a very strict calendar, so she's watching your time.
Yeah, she's going to come pull me off stage with a cane here in a second.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks very much, Representative Kessinger, Senator Skubal, and everybody on the call. Grateful for the opportunity to engage in this way. And I want to offer, if somebody needs something specifically and you'd like to email me, my email is david.toland, T as in Tom, OLAND, @ks.gov. I may not know the answer myself to your question, but I will send it to someone that does. And we're trying to do our best to be as flexible and nimble and transparent and responsive as we can, knowing that everybody's under a lot of stress right now, and we want to do our part to alleviate that among business owners and community members. So thank you all for everything you're doing, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, David, thank you again very much.
Thanks, Jan.
Thanks, everyone.
For everyone else who's here, and I'm going to unmute everybody, but maybe you have any other questions of Senator Skubal or me. We're here. But I also want to recognize Fred Lehman and Clay Norkey, who are running for state representative in different districts. I don't know if we had any other candidates on or not. Any other questions? Don Fusion, do you have a question? No, light it up. Well, if there are no other questions, again, thank everyone for being here.
I have a question.
We will continue to have these.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi, my name is Pat, and I have a question. I saw that it was on the chat line.
Sure.
Maybe it's already been answered because I was late getting on.
Okay.
But I'd like to ask about the USPS and how important it is to Kansas business. So United Postal Service, is that at risk at this point? Of not having it, privatizing it?
I don't believe that it is at risk right now. John, have you heard anything otherwise, or we've also got David Sofer?
I think, Jan, I think that they have a funding problem that will come due in September, but I don't know that for a fact. That's just what I have read. And I know that there is some talk about what they potentially would do, but I would think that the loss of the Postal Service would be devastating for a lot of folks.
Oh, absolutely it would be. It's critical. But I had not heard anything other than the fact that it is tight on funds. I know that I'm not getting as much mail as I used to, which I found a little odd. Leslie Thompson asked a question, what's happening to the Kansas budget? Today's paper indicates we may have to cut education again. I think I'll speak for John also. Neither one of us have any intention of cutting education unless it is absolutely the very last resort. That be your situation, John?
Yes, and I think that the budget situation is okay for this year. Next year, it looks like we run a deficit. And again, I have no idea when this is going to be over. I don't think any of us do, but I hope every day that we get people back to work. I would certainly like to see my barber go back to work. I'm about ready to start curling my hair here. Again, I think that the idea of a soft opening is something that we should all look forward to. And again, I don't have druthers on the post office. I know that I, like you, Jan, probably am getting less mail. It seems like our mailbox is full of catalogs, and other than that, we're not getting the amount of mail that we used to get.
And Leslie, back on specifically on the budget, the Senate Ways and Means is meeting tomorrow, and John, you're on that, right?
Yes, we'll be on the call from 9 o'clock. They're going to give us a half an hour for lunch. I don't know if I need to make a sandwich, I guess, before we get started, but they plan on us being on that all day. We'll do omnibus work, but I think a lot of it is going to be looking at budget and the potential of what can be trimmed and what the progression is for next year and what that deficit could potentially look like. And again, I think that we had set ourselves up in a situation to where we were going to have a rainy day fund. And looking out on my deck today, it looks like it's a good idea to have a rainy day fund. And from the projections with our revenue, I think that it will be beneficial to have some extra money.
We were getting into great shape. We were getting into a position that even next fiscal year, we could take a look at cutting the food sales tax. And obviously that's not on the plate right now. We've got a lot of money to be able to make up. I'm sure there is no appetite for raising taxes. So the question is, where do you cut? And education is our number one asset. I believe that we invest where we spend our money should be an investment, not an expenditure. And John and I were talking earlier today about transportation, where we had some great transportation plans coming up, including expansion on Highway 69. And it's when you put your money into construction, it multiplies many times that the money you spend goes into the economy. And additionally, it helps our infrastructure that attracts more business. So we don't want to do that. We may end up, John had suggested bonding as an option to be able to pay for those things. So then you say, well, where are you going to cut? I'm on the budget committee for transportation and public safety. And under that is the highway patrol. We authorized purchase of a couple new airplanes. And I'm saying, no, let's cut that. We can put that off. We can defer a lot of those investments. We want to be able to spend money where we get money in return. So there'll be a lot of belt tightening.
So if we would end up having to cut education, does that put us back in court with the Supreme Court having retained jurisdiction over this?
I would think so.
Yeah. I don't think we want to go to court again.
Well, I don't want to go to court either. I want to educate kids so that when we face a situation like this again, when I'm old and infirm, I'm just old now, that they're smart enough to be able to handle it better. I had another question came in about the new health statistics, new cases, et cetera. Could it have an override to some of the business openings or a county by county basis if the healthy recovery is threatened? And I would certainly think yes. Where if we start backsliding on new cases, we're going to have to shut it down right away. I would think. I don't know if Don Fusen had asked that question. I don't know if you're still on, Don, but did I answer your question adequately, or did I address it all right?
Yeah, you did, Jan. I appreciate you doing that. You read about other places that are opening with no kind of thought about how we're going to monitor the continued status and you don't want to do something that's preemptive too quick. But at the same point in time, you want to be smart about how you manage that. So my hat's off to everybody that's worried about all the various facets.
Well, I imagine we'll have a new slogan said, "Don't be Georgia," and because they are opening
I've already ordered a T-shirt for you, sir.
up. Thank you. I appreciate it. Other questions, anybody?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Connie.
I have already received my PPP SBA loan on the 14th of April. We are expecting to be closed until the 15th of May. And my question is, can you delay pulling your staff off of unemployment and let them enjoy that benefit that we've all paid into and wait until you open? But the 8-week, I know you talked about that earlier, and I was a little bit distracted, to June 30th, but it seems like my lender is saying 8 weeks from the date of receiving the money.
David Sofer, do you want to address that?
Yeah.
This
So
is our Deputy Secretary of Commerce.
yeah. So the way I would explain it is from way the SBA has explained it to us is you have a 10-day grace period from when the loans are dispersed to you. But once that 10-day grace period is up, that is when the 8 weeks will begin. There is no flexibility at the moment in that. So you really need to make every effort possible to hire back all of your employees within that 10-day grace period. Because like I said, once that's up, that's when your 8-week window will start.
Is there a way to pay them a comeback bonus or something like that for, say, a week or two before you open?
I don't know that there's anything within the mechanism of the program to pay a bonus per se. I mean, that's ultimately up to you. But you do have to spend that amount on payroll. So there is a possibility that, I will leave my email. If you want to email me your specific one, I can ask SBA specifically if we can do bonus money. But essentially, you have to meet the same payroll amount up to $100,000 in salary for each employee that you had before this disaster struck. So whether if you have a little bit less employees and you're using bonus money to kind of cover that, that's a good question, and that's something we can certainly look into.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
And David, does that cover not only the wages, but the employee salary taxes? Are they inside or outside of the loan amount to be spent? Because if I bring the people back and pay them wages, but then I can't afford, due to business downturns, I can't afford to pay the taxes associated with it, am I putting myself in a very bad position? Would that encourage people to go belly up, even if they have a loan?
Sure. No. So I believe, I believe the taxes associated with those specific employees are covered. So it's basically all expenses related to payroll. So that should be covered. Other taxes you may incur as a result of a business is another story. And those are not covered.
Thank you, David.
No problem.
So I have a question. I have a question.
Okay.
My name is Nancy. I keep reading about the importance of testing for COVID as a means to reopen business more safely. And yet I also read that Kansas is, 49 out of the 50 states in terms of testing per capita. Seems sort of like a problem to me. Why are we so low? Can something be done about that?
Well, we had supply issues at first, is my understanding, and we're getting more supplies. Dr. Norman has been working steadily on that. We've got dentists now who are developing swabs, swabs, and which is, I figured, well, it's just anything to go gather it, but it needs to actually be non-organic to do that. We're getting the testing equipment. And if I can, Patty Logan, would you mind answering or addressing that? This is, Patty Logan is a physician. On our testing situation, are you seeing more of it being done?
I really don't know the up-to-date information, Jan, but what I can tell you on testing is that there is testing done by the State Department of Health, and that's entirely different and separate from testing being done by healthcare organizations, hospital organizations. And so when you say, are we doing testing, those are kind of two completely separate types. And then you're correct in that there are so many different factors to be able to run the test. You have to have the correct kind of swab. It can't just be a Q-tip, the correct kind of swab to collect the material from someone's nose. You have to have a viral transport medium in many cases to put it into, which is like a little test tube with a few little drops of a substance that transports it. You have to have the correct kind of cartridge that your machine takes. You have to have the machine, and then of course you have to have the personnel with the protective equipment to be able to collect it. So there's just so many layers, and I don't know which of those are currently a problem, but I think what I had read recently is you're right. The swabs, I believe there was a shortage of swabs, and at another time there was a shortage of transport media. So I'm getting those.
Sure, I understand that. I guess what I'm just trying to point out is everyone talks about the importance of testing, but Kansas appears to be ranking, next to last in its testing per capita. Just pointing that out as,
Right.
a hurdle that needs to be addressed.
And there was difficulty getting supplies. Like I said, we started to manufacture, or at least our businesses, like dentists, are starting to manufacture the swabs. We got a large shipment of test kits in, and they were sent to the meat packing areas, Dodge City and what's the other one?
Garden City.
Garden City. Thank you, John. And they received the influx of new testing, and you see the improvements there. Also, if you go to the KDHE website, every day they send out news or on the site, they track how many tests are being done, how many are done privately, how many are done by the state. And then if you can even go interactively on a map and you roll your cursor over a county, it will tell you how many tests per capita are being done. Right now, Johnson County is like 6.8 tests per 1,000, I think it is, which is pretty low. Other counties are doing 12 or more. But Johnson County is now doing the random testing, which you're probably aware of. I think we invested $400,000 in testing. It's ramping up. We were behind. No doubt about it, Nancy. You are exactly right. Being 49th is nothing to be proud of, and we are working to get it higher.
Well, Governor Kelly has indicated that she's made 7 to 9 requests to FEMA for the materials we need. Are we not getting them?
No.
And if not, why not? And where are senators and congressional representatives in helping push that?
And go ahead, David.
I was gonna say, my understanding is as of late last week, early this week, we actually did get 90% of our requests. Our federal delegation did help step up, and so we're playing catch up right now with regards to much of that equipment and dispersing it out to the counties. So hopefully the remaining 10% will come through at some point, but they did end up helping us out, and we are, like I said, just trying to play catch up here.
Yes, my understanding is that Senators Moran and Roberts both were on the phone with Governor Kelly and helped the state in that regard.
Yep.
Got it through.
Okay, thank you. It's you just sort of feel unloved after a while.
Well, that's yeah, you're right, and that's what our fate is in Kansas with 3 million people compared to the much larger states. And frankly, political pull that they have. But our senators were able to get in and get us the kits we need. Yes,
Thank
Leslie.
you. Thank you.
So it seems to me that one of the things we've identified as being a problem in the state is lack of good broadband internet connectivity for everybody, particularly in rural areas. Is there any plan to address that as we try to come out of this? I don't know how kids in rural Kansas are going to school without the internet.
Well, there are some counties that do not even have any broadband at all.
Yes, so I don't know what they're doing. I mean, I'm lucky my grandkids are here going to school, but I don't know what other places are doing. So it's got to hurt our business as well as our kids.
John, you want to talk about
Jan,
what we're doing?
Jan, I might add that depending on how we do fare with the transportation bill, that we have included the Eisenhower plan, there is money in that for broadband. Not nearly enough, but my thing is, and of course I can't get the federal delegations to do what I want them to do, but I would like to see a major infrastructure plan that we have looked for years to come out of Washington, D.C. We could electrify Kansas and other farm communities like we did in the 30s and 40s. We could do the very same thing with broadband. What I would like to see us do with federal dollars that we're printing is to make sure that we invest those in infrastructure that will make our country and our communities more valuable to businesses to move into. The business that I work at would not move into an area without broadband. We couldn't do our business. And so I think that it's going to become imperative for us to get broadband into areas. I know that in DeSoto, Kansas, most people won't realize that, but just 6 months ago on the south side of K10, they had no broadband there. The kids would have to go to McDonald's. They would have to go and sit outside the library. And so it's not just rural Kansas that's struggling with broadband. It's all over our state, and it really needs to be globally looked at. And the amount of money that we put in the transportation plan is a drop in the bucket for what we actually need.
That's exactly
But
right.
we're working on it.
We are working on it. It was a key thing that we were looking for expansion with the Rural Revitalization Committee, but also aside from what the legislature's doing, I have heard that 5G with the mobile phone can really alleviate a lot of the problems with rural broadband access. And with the merger, with Sprint's merger, they're going to be able to add a lot to that. And that could be an opportunity for rural Kansas, yes.
Jan, on the 5G, it takes more towers, and yes, the throughput is faster, but you have to have a more dense field of distributors for that broadband. So 5G by itself will not solve the problem that you've adequately described.
So you've got to have subscribers out there. You've got to have people out there for them to warrant building those towers, I would assume. Okay.
Jan, the 2018 Farm Bill addressed rural broadband in large sums. So there's a tremendous amount of attention given to rural broadband through the Rural Development Program associated with the 2018 Farm Bill. So we can anticipate a lot more action and responses to the need in rural areas. And this will largely be cable-based service, at least as of August 2019, when I was there, that's the shaping of the response currently.
Okay. And Fred, I assume you learned that when you were back in Washington, D.C.?
We spent a lot of time on the 2018 Farm Bill. And
go
particularly
ahead and give a little bit. Go ahead and give a little bit of your background as to your authority in speaking.
Well, I am a veterinarian, and I spent 1 year in Congressman Jeff Fortenberry's office and dealt with a lot of agriculture issues. The rural broadband is important to Nebraska. It's also important to Kansas. And there's so much of the Farm Bill that's developed or dedicated to developing new means of getting cable to the rural areas. It's important not only for quality of life, it's important for education, and it's important for precision agriculture to be successful in the future. So there's a definite need there. The gap is being realized, and there are any number of private and public efforts to try to find some remedy and get some service, not just in the wireless methodology, but by wired. There's a lot of obstacles, so it won't happen quickly, but the need is certainly there, and there's money set aside to address it.
And obviously, broadband is key to the success from a business standpoint of rural Kansas too. What we don't want is for kids to graduate out of small towns in western Kansas, go to college, and move to Johnson County. You know, they're welcome, but for a strong Kansas, we need a strong rural community. And that's part of what broadband would do. Additional questions?
Dan, this is Paul Snyder.
Hey, Paul.
Thanks for continuing to do these and for getting special guests. I think that's helpful for everyone to get a different perspective out of Topeka. And the question I have for you and Senator Skubal would be whether there's any interest or whether you're hearing anything about possibly doing a constitutional amendment when you go back that would allow you all to conduct business not in Topeka.
Well, I might weigh in on that. Before we left in caucus, I questioned whether we could do that, and apparently constitutionally we can't. If we go back to Topeka, I can't imagine that we're going to spend a lot of time doing anything other than what's necessary. And a constitutional amendment, I think, would take some time. But if I were going to have my way with the conditions that we have in Topeka, and you've been there, and the House is even tighter than the Senate floor, I have people walking behind me constantly. I have people that sit next to me that are 2 and 3 feet away. We're just kind of packed in there. And the big thing is that the social distancing of 6 feet would be almost impossible for us to do our business. And so my idea is that we could vote by phone, we could do Zoom meetings, we could do whatever, but constitutionally it's not allowed, and it's something that I think that needs to be addressed. And I don't know, I've not heard of anything that would come to the floor like that, but again, I don't think that anybody is really planning on going back and spending a lot of time in Topeka.
Paul, the Legislative Coordinating Council met this morning. I listened in on the meeting, and I was very pleased that they were talking about the fact that the Constitution says we must meet in the Capitol, but it's spelled with an A, not an O. So that's Capitol is Topeka, not the building, which would be CAPITOL. But that's just my journalism background coming through, I guess. But they did talk about it, and they decided, well, maybe, you know, we could be in Topeka and meet by Zoom, but we would still have to be in Topeka. But for final action on any legislation, they were saying that we needed to be able to go into the chambers, but they might do it by sort of feeding us in alphabetically, you know, 1, 2, 3 at a time or something like that, and doing a vote. But there is absolutely no appetite for going back. 78% of the House of Representatives is in a vulnerable demographic. I guess we're all old. The Senate, not quite so much, which surprised me. But anyway, It's not a good thing for us to go back. It's been delayed till May 6th. We were supposed to go back Monday. No, they'll make a decision sometime before May 6th what we'll do next. Other questions? Yeah, Mark's phone buzzes at me again. Okay, I don't have anything else. John?
No, I don't either, but I would like to thank everyone for attending, and hopefully we can get back to the point that we can meet face to face again soon. We're itching to get door to door, but I don't think that we want to do that until we get past the crisis that we're in right now. But if you have ideas for people that you would like for us to invite to come to speak, please forward those on either to Jan or myself, and we would be happy to inquire as to whether they would be available.
And Senator Skubal, I want to wish you well tomorrow on the Ways and Means Committee. You had to figure out a way, and I'm counting on you to figure out how to cut $650 million out of next year's budget and leave highways and schools and social services untouched. Good luck.
Well, we have some ideas, but I don't know how well they'll be received, but I will put them on the table. I promise you that.
All right. So wish you all well. Stay safe. Stay at home. Take care. Thank you again.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you.